Ivan the Terrible, 1547 to 1584. Ivan IV wasn't just Russia's first crowned czar, he was the man who turned a medieval realm into an empire ruled by fear. Born in 1530, he lost both parents young and grew up surrounded by violent noble factions. Those boyar feuds shaped his obsession with absolute control. At 16, Ivan demanded a formal coronation as Tsar of all Russia, claiming divine authority above every noble. Early on, he showed promise: new law codes, a permanent standing army, and the conquest of Kazan and Astrakhan that doubled Russia's territory and opened the way to Siberia. But triumph soon gave way to paranoia. After the death of his beloved wife Anastasia, he became convinced the aristocracy had poisoned her. In 1565, he split the country with a brutal invention, the Oprichnina, his private state run by black-clad horsemen. They tortured and executed thousands, including entire towns accused of treason. In 1570, the sack of Novgorod left tens of thousands dead. Rivers were said to run red for days. Ivan's rage extended even to his own family. In 1581, during an argument, he struck his eldest son on the head with an iron staff, killing the heir he loved. Russia's future died with that blow. When Ivan himself died in 1584, the empire was vast but broken. His terror left it drained of leadership and trust, plunging the nation into the time of troubles. Yet his reign also forged the centralized model every Russian ruler followed afterward, a ruler above law, feared as much as revered. More than 4 centuries later, Ivan the Terrible still stands as the prototype of Russia's strong-handed power, brilliant, devout, paranoid, and unstoppable. Boris Godunov, 1598 to 2005. Boris Godunov rose from lesser nobility to the throne in one of Russia's most uncertain times. He began as an advisor and brother-in-law to Tsar Fyodor I, the last son of Ivan the Terrible. When Fyodor died childless, Boris, smart, ambitious, and politically cunning, maneuvered his way into becoming the first Tsar not born into royal blood. At first, he brought progress: schools, foreign trade, new fortresses. He wanted to modernize Russia. But rumors stalked him that he'd poisoned the young Prince Dmitri, the last heir of Ivan's line. No proof ever appeared, yet in the people's eyes, guilt stained everything he did. Then came disaster. From 1601 to 1603, the sky darkened with volcanic ash from far-off eruptions, ruining harvests and causing famine that killed over 100,000 people in Moscow alone. Starvation bred fury. When a man claiming to be Dmitri reappeared, actually an impostor supported by Poland, desperate Russians rallied to him. By 1605, Boris Godunov was dead, likely from stroke or despair, his dynasty instantly swept away. His rule marked the start of Russia's time of troubles, a reminder of how fragile the throne was when power rose not from divine birth, but sheer human will. False Dmitri I, 1605 to 1606. Few rulers in history began their reign as a mystery. False Dmitri I appeared in Poland claiming he was Ivan the Terrible's long-dead son, the same prince the people believed Boris Godunov had murdered. Backed by Polish nobles, Catholic priests, and the promise of revenge, he marched into Moscow in 1605. When Boris suddenly died, the path was wide open. Dmitri was crowned Tsar. For a year, he tried to reshape Russia his own way. He freed many prisoners, punished corrupt officials, and even planned to end serfdom. But his charm came packaged with shocking novelty: a Catholic wife, foreign customs, laughing courtiers whom Russians saw as foreign invaders inside the Kremlin. The Orthodox Church and the boyars seethed. In May 1606, at his wedding feast, conspirators stormed the palace. Dmitri was dragged outside and killed on the Kremlin square, his body displayed to the crowd, then burned and stuffed into a cannon fired toward Poland. Russia spiraled deeper into chaos as pretenders kept claiming his name. His short, violent story became a symbol of how desperation for legitimacy can twist a nation, and how easily hope in the true heir turns into another chapter of blood.
Peter the Great, 1682 to 1725. Peter I didn't just rule Russia, he rebuilt it from the ground up. Born 1672, he took power during vicious court rivalries and almost immediately dreamed of breaking Russia's isolation from Europe. He studied shipbuilding in Dutch docks, drilled with English sailors, and returned home determined to drag his country into the modern age, whether it wanted it or not. He created a powerful navy, reformed the army, and introduced taxes, uniforms, and schools modeled after the West. His wars against Sweden were brutal but decisive. Victory at Poltava in 1709 made Russia a leading European empire. In celebration, he founded a new capital, St. Petersburg, built by thousands of laborers in freezing marshland, his window to Europe. But modernization came with terror. Peter crushed rebellions with shocking cruelty. He forced nobles to shave their beards and women to appear at court without veils. In 1718, suspecting treason, he ordered the torture and death of his own son, Alexei. When Peter died in 1725, Russia was vastly larger, its army unstoppable, and its culture forever changed. Yet the nation he modernized learned that progress, under him, always arrived wearing iron gloves. The world called him Peter the Great, and Russia never looked the same again. Catherine the Great, 1762 to 1796. Catherine II wasn't Russian by birth. She was a German princess who came to St. Petersburg at just 15. She married the awkward Grand Duke Peter, heir to the throne, and quietly learned how Russia worked from behind palace curtains. When Peter III finally became Tsar, his bizarre behavior and pro-Prussian politics quickly turned the court against him. Within months, Catherine led a coup. Peter died mysteriously soon after, and she became empress. Catherine styled herself as an Enlightenment reformer. She read Voltaire, corresponded with Diderot, dreamed of rational, modern governance. Under her, Russia expanded south into the Black Sea and west into Poland. The empire grew by nearly 500,000 square miles. Yet her enlightened mask covered an iron will. When serfs rebelled under Pugachev in 1773, she unleashed the army. Tens of thousands were executed or deported. She strengthened nobles' power over the peasants who tilled their land. Her court glittered with culture, art, science, philosophy, while the wider nation stayed bound by hardship. Still, her reign made Russia a cultural giant and a global empire. Catherine the Great died in luxury, leaving behind a state larger, richer, and far more centralized than she'd found it, but also one simmering with inequality that would explode generations later. Paul I, 1796 to 1801. When Catherine's son Paul I inherited the throne, Russia braced for change and got turmoil instead. Paul had spent 40 years in his mother's shadow, convinced she'd planned to pass the crown to her grandson. Distrust and humiliation brewed into obsession. Once crowned, he overturned many of her policies just to erase her legacy. He made military uniforms mandatory for courtiers, issued hundreds of decrees micromanaging daily life, and punished disobedience with exile. Even the color of a soldier's buttons could draw his wrath. He introduced compulsory succession laws to ensure his own dynasty, a move that haunted Russia for centuries by locking monarchy into rigid inheritance. But his paranoia grew fatal. Afraid that foreign revolutions could reach Russia, he flipped alliances overnight, first joining Britain against France, then nearly siding with Napoleon. By 1801, noble officers had had enough. One night, they entered his bedroom to force abdication. In the struggle, Paul was struck and suffocated. His son Alexander became Tsar. Historians remember Paul I not just as eccentric, but as proof that absolute power and insecurity make a deadly mix. His reign lasted barely 5 years, but his fear still echoes behind every cautious reform that followed. Alexander I, 1801 to 1825. Alexander I came to the throne after his father's murder, a secret that haunted him all his life. Educated by Enlightenment tutors, he promised a gentler, modern Russia with new schools, limited censorship, even whispers of a constitution. But idealism quickly collided with old-world power. In 1805, Napoleon smashed Russia's army at Austerlitz. Alexander rebuilt, fought again, and in 1812 faced the ultimate test, Napoleon's invasion with nearly 500,000 troops. Alexander refused to surrender, ordered Moscow abandoned and burned, and waited as winter and hunger destroyed the invaders. Only 30,000 French troops made it home. That victory turned him into Europe's savior. After 1812, his faith shifted toward mysticism. He grew paranoid, crushed early liberal movements, and helped build the conservative Holy Alliance to keep Europe's monarchs on top. Russia gained prestige but slid back into repression. By his last years, Alexander vanished into religious retreat and died suddenly in 1825, or, some whispered, faked his death to live as a holy monk. He left an empire both triumphant and uncertain, caught between reform and control. Alexander I was the dreamer who defeated Napoleon and proved that even idealists in Russia can't escape the gravity of absolute power. Nicholas I, 1825 to 1855. Nicholas came to power through chaos. When his brother Constantine refused the throne, confused regiments declared for him anyway, the Decembrist revolt of 1825. Nicholas crushed it within hours. From that day, he trusted no one. His watchwords, orthodoxy, autocracy, and nationality, became a doctrine of control. He built a vast police network, censored books, and treated the empire like a regiment. Wearing a polished uniform daily, he personally signed off on punishments and exiles. Under him, poets were silenced, students spied on, and Siberia filled with dissenters. Russia became a fortress of order. Abroad, he cast himself as Europe's policeman, suppressing revolts in Poland and Hungary. But his empire's rigid discipline hid brittleness. Technology lagged, railways crawled when the West raced forward. In 1853, his ambition collided with the Ottoman Empire and Western powers in the Crimean War. Russia faced Britain and France at once and fell behind in weapons, medicine, and logistics. Nicholas's vast, obedient army could not match modern fire. By 1855, the defeat at Sevastopol broke him. He died that winter, some say of pneumonia, others of pride. His iron rule left Russia disciplined but dangerously outdated, a gleaming bayonet that snapped when finally tested. Alexander II, 1855 to 1881. Few Russian rulers changed their country as boldly as Alexander II, and paid as dearly. When he inherited the throne in 1855, the Crimean catastrophe showed that Russia's feudal system was rotting. His answer was sweeping reform. In 1861, he freed over 20 million serfs, the largest emancipation in Europe. He modernized courts, allowed local councils, built railroads, and even encouraged education for women. Foreign victories followed. Central Asia expanded. Alaska was sold to the U.S. for cash and strategy, and the empire industrialized faster than ever. For a moment, Russia seemed to shed its medieval skin. But freedom sparked expectations Alexander couldn't control. Radical movements demanded constitutions. Revolutionaries saw him as both tyrant and betrayer. As he tightened security, underground cells plotted assassinations. In 1881, as his carriage passed a canal in St. Petersburg, a bomb killed his guards. Stepping out to help the wounded, a second bomb tore through him instead. He died minutes later, plans for a new parliament still in his pocket. Within days, his son reversed most of those reforms. History immortalized him as the Tsar Liberator who opened Russia's future only to be destroyed by it.
Alexander III, 1881 to 1894. If his father dreamed of reform, Alexander III dreamed of control. He witnessed Alexander II's mangled body firsthand, and the sight turned him hard forever. His motto, "No experiments." He crushed liberal movements, banned political parties, and empowered the Okhrana, the secret police. His policy of Russification forced hundreds of ethnic groups to adopt Russian language and Orthodox faith. Schools, courts, and papers all followed strict state ideology. Dissent meant exile. And yet, beneath the repression, Russia stabilized. Industry boomed under his finance minister Sergei Witt. Railways spread, steel output grew fivefold, and the Trans-Siberian Railway began. Abroad, Alexander avoided wars entirely, earning him the nickname the Peacekeeper. But peace under fear came at a price: silence instead of trust. Towering 6'4", bearded and imposing, he once snapped a steel goblet in his bare hand during dinner, a favorite story that captured his image: immense strength, short temper, absolute confidence. When he died unexpectedly in 1894, the empire was calm on the surface, yet pressure simmered beneath. His heir, Nicholas II, inherited not reform or renewal, but the heavy lid of repression about to explode. Nicholas II, 1894 to 1917. Nicholas II never meant to be Russia's last czar, but history rarely asks permission. Born into privilege, gentle and polite, he loved his family more than politics. Yet when he took the throne in 1894, he swore to uphold absolute rule just as the world around him demanded change. At first, the empire prospered industrially. Cities grew, railroads stretched east to the Pacific, but poverty deepened and new political voices shouted for reform. In 1905, peaceful protesters marching to the Winter Palace were met with gunfire. Bloody Sunday. Hundreds killed, thousands wounded. The shock forced Nicholas to create a parliament, the Duma, but he never trusted it. Then came tragedy upon tragedy: defeat by Japan, renewed unrest, and the eerie influence of Rasputin, the mystic healer tied to the ailing heir Alexei. When World War I hit, Nicholas took command himself, leaving a corrupt court to his wife's care. The front collapsed, millions died, the empire starved. By 1917, soldiers refused to fight, strikes froze the capital, and Nicholas abdicated, ending 3 centuries of Romanov rule. A year later, he and his family were executed in a basement. Nicholas II's reign began with faith in divine right and ended with gunfire and silence, the twilight of monarchy, replaced by revolution. Vladimir Lenin, 1917 to 1924. Lenin rose from exile to topple an empire. Born 1870 into a middle-class family, his life changed when his brother was executed for plotting against the Tsar. From that day, revolution became religion.
After decades of underground work, he returned to Russia in 1917, arriving at Petrograd Station with just one mission: peace, land, bread. As the provisional government struggled with war and chaos, Lenin and the Bolsheviks struck. In October, they seized power. No grand battle, just armed workers taking over the capital overnight. He dissolved the parliament, signed peace with Germany, and unleashed the Red Terror: executions, censorship, and a secret police force that crushed opposition. The ensuing civil war killed an estimated 8 to 10 million people. Lenin justified everything as necessary for the world's first socialist state. Even as his health failed after repeated strokes, he built the bureaucracy that would outlive him, the Communist Party machine. By the time he died in 1924, preserved in a glass tomb on Red Square, Russia had become the Soviet Union, a superpower in embryo, forged through ideology and fear. Lenin promised liberation, delivered iron centralization, and left a legacy that would shape the entire 20th century.
Joseph Stalin, 1924 to 1953. Where Lenin built theory, Stalin built empire, one forged in terror and steel. Born in 1878 in poverty in Georgia, he clawed upward through cunning and brutality. After Lenin's death, he outmaneuvered rivals with ruthless patience until by the late 1920s he ruled unchallenged. His vision was transformation at any cost. Massive 5-year plans forced industrial growth. Vast factories rose even as millions starved during collectivization of farms. Entire villages vanished. Historians estimate more than 20 million deaths from famine, purges, and gulag camps. Still, Stalin's iron strategy turned a peasant land into an industrial and nuclear superpower. When Nazi Germany invaded in 1941, he rallied the nation. The Great Patriotic War cost the USSR 27 million lives, but ended with Soviet soldiers raising their flag over Berlin. After victory, fear deepened. Purges targeted generals, artists, even friends. People toasted his birthday while whispering his name in terror. By the time he died in 1953, millions wept, partly from grief, partly from habit. Stalin left behind a country both triumphant and traumatized, a paradox of progress built on suffering. In his world, power was absolute, truth negotiable, and loyalty the only currency worth living for. Nikita Khrushchev, 1953 to 1964. When Stalin died in 1953, fear ran the Soviet Union like electricity. Into that vacuum stepped Nikita Khrushchev, a blunt, impulsive survivor who'd learned politics in the furnace of terror. At first, few took him seriously. They underestimated how dangerous honesty could be. In 1956, Khrushchev shocked the world with his secret speech, denouncing Stalin's crimes and the cult of personality. The move cracked decades of silence. Political prisoners returned, censorship eased, and hope flickered that the USSR could breathe again. Yet his thaw was never gentle. Hungary's uprising that same year was smashed by Soviet tanks, killing thousands. Khrushchev raced to prove communism's strength through science and spectacle. He launched Sputnik in 1957, the first satellite in orbit, and boasted that the USSR would bury the West. At home, concrete apartment blocks rose for millions, and corn became his obsession, sometimes planted even where snow fell. Then came 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. The world stood a breath away from nuclear war. After 13 days of brinksmanship, Khrushchev agreed to withdraw missiles, saving peace but losing prestige. 2 years later, his rivals quietly removed him from power. He retired to a dacha near Moscow, writing memoirs smuggled to the West. No executions, no show trials, just silence. Khrushchev proved that even in the Soviet age, a leader could challenge tyranny and survive it, however briefly.
Vladimir Putin, 1999 to present. Few modern rulers have shaped Russia's image so completely as Vladimir Putin. Born in Leningrad in 1952, he came to age amid the Soviet collapse, chaos, poverty, lost pride. A former KGB officer, he entered politics promising stability when Russia was broken by the 1990s wild capitalism. When he became acting president in 1999, Chechen rebellions and terrorist attacks rocked the nation. Putin's answer was swift, brutal force. Within months, Grozny lay in ruins, and Russia saw its first glimpse of the new order, security above freedom. Through the 2000s, oil wealth and discipline rebuilt the state. Wages rose, debts vanished, Moscow glittered, and his approval soared past 70%. Yet critics disappeared, journalists were silenced, and opponents found exile or worse. His image hardened from technocrat to strongman. In 2014, Russia annexed Crimea, defying global outrage and reviving imperial nostalgia. In 2022, a full-scale invasion of Ukraine reignited confrontation with the West, unseen since the Cold War. Sanctions bit, isolation deepened, but Putin's grip endured. To supporters, he restored dignity after humiliation. To rivals, he revived autocracy. After 20 years in power, he stands among the longest ruling Russian leaders in history. Whether remembered as restorer or destroyer, his era defines 21st century Russia, a state once again ruled by the certainty of strength.